I've been getting a bunch of ads and stuff now, of course, for like hypnosis courses and stuff like that, or people who do hypnosis. The algorithm has figured it out. um, so I just want to like point out the fact that a lot of these people that I'm seeing, and a lot of people that claim to be hypnotherapists, and one of the primary reasons why I don't like saying that I do hypnosis is because it brings up these connotations of all these sort of, well, I mean, a lot of people are like outright charlatans, you know, directly scamming people intentionally. And there's also people who, you know, maybe should know better, but maybe don't because they're just sort of naive, you know, Dunning-Kruger effect type thing. But like, it's important to realize that trance is like a perfectly normal everyday state that people go into all the time. And it is incredibly easy to learn how to induce a trance in another person. I mean, it's not difficult at all to do. And I mean, anybody who's ever been under hypnosis can hypnotize another person. That's something I don't think people realize. It's like really not difficult at all. What's difficult what's difficult is the both from the perspective of self-hypnosis and from the perspective of becoming a hypnotherapist, is understanding how to utilize the state properly and understanding what it is and what it isn't. And there are an awful lot of people, well, let me put it this way. I've talked before about how there's the old school form of hypnosis where it's Freud, for example, his method of inducing trance, and the reason why he gave up trying to induce trance. Literally, you can read this in Studies in Hysteria, which is the first publication that Freud made that started the whole psychoanalytic movement. I don't know if people realize this, but Freud was originally a neuroscientist, a doctor who, you know, studied brain cells under microscopes. That's how he got his start. That and singing the praises of cocaine, but that's a whole different story. Anyway, he where's I going with this? Oh yeah, he would just literally, he would say sleep, and the person would either like go into a trance or they wouldn't. that was his whole method, because Charcot, the person who trained him, was also kind of a hack. And see, this is the thing, is that there's this other aspect of hypnosis that most people, I'm realizing now, the general public is probably not as even familiar with the pocket watch guys as they are with the stage hypnotists, which that is what Charcot was. He was a stage hypnotist. It was a big production that he put on. It was a show that people came to watch. And actually, that's what a lot of the mesmerists were doing as well. They'd go around and put on shows for the rich people. The thing about that is that it's even easier to be a stage hypnotist than to learn the basics of inducing a trance. Because literally, what people don't recognize is that there is an unconscious association with being at the center of a stage performing for people to perform. You know, it's, you know, it's just, if you put people on a stage, first of all, if you have absolutely no idea what you're doing at all, you know nothing about trance, you know nothing about, you know, suggestibility tests, which are sort of nonsensical in the first place, but they work in a stage hypnotist setting. You can just grab enough people and go to each of them and say, sleep, sleep, sleep. And some of them will. That's just the reality of it. it takes no skill to do that at all. And then once you do that, again, if you're a person who has absolutely no skill, okay, yeah, you can tell them to dance like a chicken, and they will, because they're on a stage and they want to perform for people, and it's funny, you know. But like, that doesn't mean you have any idea what's going on. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to be effective with anybody who isn't just like waiting to be told exactly what to do, which, I mean, those people exist. They're great for starting cults with, but you know, it's not exactly productive, you know. And in fact, it can be kind of psychologically damaging to people. And one of the reasons why hypnosis often gets a bad rap is because of the fact that when this becomes popular, which it goes in waves. This isn't the first time that it's started to gain traction. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's difficult to tell whether it looks like it's gaining traction to me because I'm becoming more aware of it and the algorithm is becoming more aware of me. Excuse me. But anyway, what a good hypnotherapist is, what a good therapist is, what a good healer, what a good philosopher, what a good shaman, you know, whatever it is that you want to call it, because really they are all the exact same people and they are all doing the exact same thing. They just have different names and ways of describing it, but it's the same stuff. But what the ones who are really good are simply people who are just very self-aware. They're aware of their own cognitive processes, and they're aware, and because they're aware of them, and literally like the basis of hypnotic suggestion, quote unquote. I don't like using the term suggestion, and Milton Erickson himself moved away from it towards the end because it brings up this whole association of the suggestibility thing, which is complete nonsense. But anyway, the basics of them, they're called truisms. That's what Milton Erickson called them, at least. And it's literally just like, if you mention a psychological process, it can induce that in people. You know, so if you just say you can remember things, you'll start remembering things. You know, I mean, that's a terrible example, but I don't want to, it's not a good idea to start speaking in a way that is hypnotic and then recording that and sending it out to people, because you don't want to induce trance in somebody that you're not able to see. You know, it's really not, it's not ideal. Anyway, somebody who really understands how the psyche works can guide other people to find those processes within themselves. This is one of the reasons why pretty much anybody who's had any sort of built any sort of reputation as being any kind of healer and had any sort of success with it, you find, has gone through something called a creative illness. That's what Henri Ellenberger calls it, at least. He points out Freud's creative illness, and Carl Jung has a very famous one that most people have heard of, but a lot of people don't know that Freud went through a very similar thing. Milton Erickson, my lord, that man went through a whole series. His entire life was a creative illness. He went through polio and a whole bunch of other stuff. But basically what a creative illness is, you find that people who have become successful healers are people who have had some sort of either physical or psychological ailment where they had to learn how to access their own inner healing abilities. And because they learned how to access their own inner healing abilities, they now can teach other people to do the same thing. Which is why, if you follow the Freudian school, what am I trying to say? Basically, each healer that exists is healing themselves over and over again. And so if you happen to be attracted to a Freudian school, you may have an Oedipus complex. And you know who else had the Oedipus complex? Was Freud, which is why he thinks everybody has one. And why, and partly because that's what he went through, and then because people that he was successful in treating had the same thing, you know. And then Adler, again, a similar thing, but from a different perspective, and same with Jung, etc., etc., etc. But again, the ones who are really successful, I mean, Jung was by far the best, the top psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever you want to call it, of his time, certainly outstripped Freud, while they were still both alive. Again, as I've mentioned before, and Milton Erickson in particular, what they recognize is that again, I've talked about this before in my first video about the importance of the individual, essentially, that you throw all of the things that you've learned away and you focus on the individual. Anyway, I'm reading this book right now by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Mircea Eliade, something like that. He's like Romanian, I think. Absolutely brilliant comparative mythology guy. A huge follower of Jung, so super influenced by that. So of course I like him. But I'm reading his book on shamanism right now, and it's talking about how there's this conception that in shamanic tribes, there's this conception in modern psychology, or whatever you want to call it, in popular culture, that basically charismatic schizophrenics would lead these groups of people, and they are just, foolish, primitive peoples that followed crazy people, and that's what shamans are, basically. But what Eliade points out is that there's several tribes where people have schizophrenia and it's common, or have epilepsy, which is the other big one that people always say, oh, he's just epileptic. He's just like a crazy person who's epileptic and has a seizure. But the thing is that these tribes will have lots of people. There's one tribe in particular, and I think it was in Africa, that I can't remember. I'd have to pull up the book. But epilepsy was super common among the people, but none of them thought that those people were shamans. The thing that made you a shaman was not being epileptic. It's being epileptic and then curing yourself of your epilepsy. That's what was so compelling. And the thing is that, the wild ramblings of schizophrenics have never influenced anybody. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe there's been a couple of instances, but they certainly haven't gotten very far. It's kind of insulting to think that all people were just so easily influenced by completely wildly crazy people. What the people who would have these sort of schizophrenic type episodes after they had healed themselves, there was like actual real religious and spiritual and true, psychological knowledge being disseminated through that, Anyway, I'm not Milton Erickson, and I'm not Carl Jung, and I'm not a shaman. Certainly not Freud. But I've certainly gone through my own little creative illness, and it's been real fun. But it's a lot easier than people think it is to overcome things like anxiety and depression. It's hard if you're teaching yourself how to do it, but I've done that for myself. I've had to teach myself these things by studying people who have done them. And again, I'm not anywhere near on the same level as the people that I've studied. I'm not claiming to be, but I know how to induce trance in pretty much anybody who wants to. I mean, there are people who, there's people that are called incongruent. Well, that's what the NLP guys will call them, at least. People who are seeking out hypnotherapy but do it in a way that's challenging. And I have not yet had the experience of successfully working with one of those people, but actually I'm pretty confident that I would be able to at this point with the level of training and effort that I've put into this. But from within a trance state, first of all, as far as anxiety goes, oftentimes just learning how to go into a trance state is the thing that alleviates your anxiety. Just that by itself. And in fact, that's really the primary tool. The thing is, oftentimes anxiety comes from this sort of over insistence, hypervigilance of consciousness. The conscious mind wants to control everything and feels the need to be hypervigilant. Hypervigilant. I don't know why I'm saying words that only people who've read the books that I've read understand. You know, a lot of people latch on and they want to control everything consciously because they have had an experience, or either a constant experience or a particularly traumatic moment, or a series of them that have left people feeling out of control. And so the way that a lot of people will cope with that is by, again, holding far too tightly. And literally, just by learning how to go into a trance, you start to learn how to trust your unconscious mind. And you start to recognize the fact that your unconscious mind really should be driving most of the things that you do. And it will do the things that it needs to do and that you need to have done without your constant poking at it with your conscious mind to make sure it's happening. And in fact, the constant conscious poking and pestering of yourself specifically gets in the way, and your unconscious mind gets mad at you. It's almost one way of putting it. I mentioned Erickson had several bouts of polio throughout his life. And so at a certain point in his life, he was walking with a cane. Actually, in multiple points in his life, he was walking with a cane. Eventually, he ended up in a wheelchair, but he was walking with a cane long after he was told he would never walk again. Anyway, that's a whole different story. He tells this story of seeing another man who was walking with a cane in there was ice on the ground. It was winter, and he was struggling to cross a patch of ice on the ground because it's, difficult enough to walk without slipping with ice on the ground. When you've got perfect use of your body, it's even more difficult if you're relearning how to walk and you're walking with a cane. What Erikson did is he came up and he showed him how to walk on, they call it glare ice in the story. I'm not familiar with that term. But anyway, he comes up and he says, I can teach you how to do this. You just have to trust me. And what he does is he grabs him by the arm, and he trusts him because Milton Erickson walks across the ice to get to him on his cane. He takes the guy by the arm and he tells him to close his eyes, and he just walks back and forth and has him notice, how to walk. And what the man doesn't realize is that as they're walking, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk on supposedly the part that doesn't have the ice, slowly Erikson is increasing the distance that they're walking until they end up walking across to the other side of the ice. Because the trick to walking on ice when you are walking with a cane is to walk normally. Because when you tense up, that's what causes you to slip. But when you trust your unconscious mind, it ends up taking care of things a lot better than your conscious mind can. Big surprise. It's a lot smarter than your conscious mind. And I think this is, the main lesson that hypnosis has to offer for the vast majority of people, is simply how to utilize the fact that your unconscious mind is way better at most things than you are, and to trust it. Again, it's important that we develop our conscious minds and our rational abilities, and it's also important that, we learn to recognize cognitive biases and all of those different things, which all of that involves the conscious mind sort of taking over for the unconscious mind. But it's also important that we learn to, especially once we've learned how to do something consciously, that we learn how to trust our unconscious minds to do it for you better. I think that's one of the reasons why I can only record these videos at 3 in the morning. I call them videos. I don't know why I call them videos. I record the sound and then put random animations on top of them. Because it's 3 a.m. and my phone camera can't record anything worth seeing, even with the light in my car is on. It just doesn't work very well. Anyway. I was raised as a Mormon, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as they insist on being called, despite the fact that they will openly admit that they think that modern-day prophets are the people that you should listen to over Jesus, which I think is kind of wild. But anyway, during the time in my life in which I believed that the Mormon Church was the whole truth and nothing but the truth, my mom told me this story, or at least I have a single memory of my mom telling me this story. I'm not exactly sure that it even happened, but the important thing to note is that I believed all of it at one time. that, I'm not sure that her telling me the story is what happened. And so therefore I'm even less sure that the story actually occurred. And I'm really afraid to talk about this, which I think is why I'm burying it deep within this other rambling rant that no one is going to get through. Because I don't want to give the impression that I'm saying something that I'm not. But when I was young, I have this memory of my mom telling me this story that when she was a baby, she was very sick and they didn't think she was going to make it. And that her mother came in and saw an angel holding my mother and then placed her in the bed and then disappeared. And that my mom believed that she had been saved for a special purpose, and at least implied and I certainly picked up the belief that that special purpose was to give birth to me, which is, sort of wild. And so for a long time, well, and that's actually not the only thing, but we'll leave it at that for now. For a long time, I sort of had this belief that I was literally God's gift to the earth. And it turns out that that sort of attitude is not a super effective one, unless you happen to be, the son of a rich person or something, maybe. But it certainly didn't work out very well for me. And so what I figured out is that, especially as I started recognizing the cult-like aspects of the Mormon Church, which I'm probably going to talk about that at some point. I figured out that even if that was the case, that I was some sort of special, that God had a special plan for me to do on this earth, that it wasn't just something that was going to be handed to me because I was special, that I was going to have to work pretty hard for it and go through some pretty difficult things. And that's why I've spent all this time reading all the different things that I read and studying all the different things that I study and trying all the different things that I've tried until I found the different things that have worked for me. And that's why I'm sharing this stuff, even though it's really difficult for me to talk about. And, it's not really my goal to make a bunch of money or get a bunch of fame, but I would like to help people as much as I possibly can. And the one thing I can say for sure is that the things that I have learned have helped me to face life with more confidence and calmness and peace, despite the absolute utter turmoil I'm in. I'm literally 2 days away from homelessness again. And it's sort of been that's sort of where housing insecure is how I started my life, and it seems to be the trajectory that it keeps going on. Um, and despite the fact that it's, perhaps delusional, um, I think that the best use of my time that I have living here, in this thing that we call mortal existence, is to study this stuff and try and help people, despite the fact that every single time I reach out to people to try to tell them about this, I get, I literally get spat in the face, practically. I mean, it's sort of, it's wild to be like, hey, I want to help you with some things. I think that this stuff would be useful for you. And to have people respond with the anger that they do. Part of that comes from the fact that I am very I can only seem to talk about this, past 2 a.m. for one thing. So, people getting wild 4 a.m. texts from me with my rambling communication style don't understand what I'm talking about. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with all of this. All I know is that if you're struggling with something, particularly of a psychological nature, and you want me to try and help you, I will try and help you to the best of my ability. And I'm probably not going to ask you for anything in return. So, hit me up or whatever.